Hi, I'm Mike Glenn, and I am the president of the Engaged Church Network. Thanks for dropping by today. Daryl Crouch, a local pastor, ministry leader in our area. I've known Daryl for longer than
Long
either
time.
of us want to
Yeah.
admit. But it's been interesting to watch the progress, the progression of his ministry. And you keep hearing us talk about the 5 points of clarity. The pastor has to be clear about their own identity, and it has to be settled in Christ. The pastor has to understand their calling and the context of that calling. They have to understand their congregation, their community, and then where the congregation and community intersect. That's usually the point of mission. Daryl has been a longtime pastor, 28 years, 29 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Pastored a church in the downtown area of Nashville, and then was out in the Lebanon area. And so now works in a regional ministry called Everyone's Wilson.
Yeah.
So talk about how you made the decision. When I was growing up, we were laughing about this a while ago, how you left the ministry.
Yeah, that's
Because
right.
if you weren't
yeah.
a preacher of a church or a minister
Yeah.
of music, then you weren't in the ministry. The idea that you would lead a city-focused,
Mm-hmm.
business leader-focused ministry.
Yeah.
So talk about that
Yeah.
context and how you
Yeah.
began to understand that.
Well, like you said, I was a pastor for 28 years. That's really all I ever knew. That's all I ever really thought I would do, and I loved it. And I miss a lot of it. There's so much of the local church that I love, and I do believe in the local church. I think the local church is hope for the world. As long as we're mobilized into the cities and the context that God's given to us. And so we started asking a few different questions. As our pastors and elders, we just began to pray and ask some different questions about our ability and our effectiveness in reaching people who were not coming to our church. And in our community, as well as in most counties in our state, 80% of our neighbors are not connected to a church or to Christ on any kind of regular basis.
Right.
So the overwhelming lostness of our city was a burden of my heart to say, how could we then posture ourselves as local missionaries? And so we began to ask just different questions. I know you were a longtime pastor. I never had a personnel committee ask me, Daryl, are there fewer lost people in my community, in our community, than there this year than last? Or are there fewer kids needing a foster home this year than last? The metrics or the scorecard that we used was very internal, and there's some good things about that. But we just started asking, what would it look like if we expanded the scorecard to include the welfare, the shalom, Jeremiah 29, the shalom, the wholeness of the city into our metrics. And so through that process, as well as a lot of other conversations, prayer, and experiences, God just called me into a new aspect and context of ministry. I still consider myself a minister of the gospel. I am. I see myself as a local missionary, really, trying to mobilize the church into the darkest, most vulnerable places in our community.
Now, we had several conversations while you were still the pastor, but the germ of Everyone's Wilson or the kind of the dream of it was beginning to take shape in your own head. Yeah. So what were those moments that burdened you, that broke your heart, where you said, we've got to do something?
Yeah, there were several of them. And so one, I was in a meeting with the director of schools in our area, and I didn't know anything about a backpack program. That's a food program where we send food home with vulnerable kids on the weekend. I didn't know anything about that. So a church member invited me to this meeting at a local church on a weeknight, and the director of schools was there, and she gave us a lot of information about what they were doing and how we could be a part of it, and she just happened to mention that 25% of our public school students qualified for free and reduced lunch. Now, we live in the second wealthiest county in Tennessee, second, well behind Williamson, but nevertheless second. We're a wealthy county, and yet 1 in 4 of our public school students live in a vulnerable poverty kind of space, so that when Christmas Day comes, they've already been out of school long enough that they're not having a lot of fun. They don't have enough food. They don't have enough attention from their parents. So there were some moments like that. And when it's not just the poverty piece, it's the relational and spiritual brokenness that has led to that. So when you know that 80% of your neighbors aren't connected to Christ or a church, that's a spiritual problem, but that always leads to a physical problem and to relational problems. So the breakdown of the family and single moms trying to raise a couple of kids, and she's trying to hold down a couple of jobs. She's not getting her kids to Vacation Bible School. Our church family, they're taking their kids to every Vacation Bible School in town all summer, but she doesn't have transportation. She doesn't have an ability or the discretionary time to run her kids to all the things that you run your kids to, or I run mine to. So it's more than just poverty. It's relational brokenness.
It's lack of access.
Lack of access. And you're thinking, well, those people aren't coming to church not because they hate God, but because they can't get to church on a Sunday. They don't have access. Yeah. So how are we going to go to them? When Bartimaeus was crying out to Jesus as he was, have mercy on me, Jesus asked him, Bartimaeus, what do you want? And Bartimaeus didn't say, I want to go to your Bible study or teach me more about you. He said, I want to see. And Jesus made Bartimaeus' success his goal. When the good of others is our goal, God gets the glory and others get to experience Jesus in a very personal way. And so we just became very aware. There was some scales that were removed from our eyes and our hearts, and we began to step in. And what would it look like to mobilize a unified church in a community to network and integrate with businesses and nonprofits and join what God's already doing in the community in a bigger way? So those were a couple of points along the way. But yeah.
So what happens when there's always that great moment where you have the idea. Yeah, this will work, and you've doodled all over the napkin, and you'll change it. Then reality sets in about how you actually get it done.
Yeah,
everybody's got a good idea. Few people can execute that idea.
That's right.
So talk about the transition or those moments of affirmation where the Lord lets you know you're on the right path. Churches are great, and we love them. They don't work well together.
That's right.
Most of the time. So the idea that you've got 70 congregations that are somehow related to everybody's Wilson, that in and of itself is apocalyptic. And
it is. Yeah, and that's a real interesting dynamic. So one of those moments was that when we started to step into this, there was a handful of other pastors who loved what we were doing. Some of it was around racial reconciliation kind of conversations. This was not political at all. It was just some realities in our community we wanted to address. There was some unity efforts that were very attractive to just a handful of pastors. Well, that started to gain momentum. And so pastors, we began to have lunch together. We started to build relationships together. A friend of mine told me a long time ago, I think he was quoting somebody else, but he was working out of 2 Peter chapter 1, and it's a loose paraphrase, but he said, if you'll get to know and learn to like and grow to love each other deeply, God can do some great things. So there was a group of pastors, a handful of pastors that began to learn to like each other, grow to love each other, and began to build trust in a way that was pretty significant. So that was one piece. Trust is the currency of transformation. Many times we come in with a good idea, and it is a good idea, and we want to change the world. And then we ask other people to buy into our idea. That's kindness and compliance and even cooperation. But what we intended to do, or still work to do, is to create an environment of collaboration where we're all in the room making the sausage together, is what we say. That it's not my idea or your idea. Let's figure out what reality is. What do we want the reality to be? And so how do we get there together? And so doing the work of building the relational trust and building the capital relationally with one another is the key to community transformation. So I'd say trust is first. But then the next thing we discovered, and we're still working to solve this and helping churches do this, churches have no system for cooperating with each other. Even when pastors love each other and trust each other, they don't really have a mechanism to do some things together around a school or a nonprofit or in the marketplace. And so what we do, we try to work to build systems. And those systems can be as simple as convening people in the same room, which you're very good at and understand the value of. We've built toolkits that say, hey, here's how you can cooperate together around this school or around this anti-trafficking initiative or this foster initiative. And so we kind of bake in opportunities for them to work together. And so we put a couple of churches together around a school along with a business. Mm-hmm. And so in our school partnership initiative, it happens not organically. We've created the systems, but we've teed them up so they're more likely to cooperate together. Still hard, still doesn't always work, every time in the way that we want it to, but we're much farther down the road because we've built some systems for them to cooperate.
Well, it's always that a lot of people want to, most people don't know how.
They don't know how.
So the system gives them.
Yep, they don't have to go Google it and figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing in which and you've giving yourself to is that pastor health is a big barrier, or unhealth is a big barrier. Mm-hmm. A lot of pastors are just overwhelmed, and their Sunday's always coming. The needs of their church are very real and palpable, and so when we talk about cooperating and doing some other things, it seems out of reach.
Yeah,
and so
they don't have the capacity.
They don't have capacity. So we're trying to put it within reach in a relational context where they know they're loved and supported, and in the context of that relationship, they can do some great things together. Yeah.
Talk to me about one of what was the first big victory for Everyone's Wilson? Just where you said, "Hey, we got an idea," and you tried it, and it worked.
Yeah. Well, for us, it was the school partnership initiative. Yeah. It's called the Ready Initiative. So when we began, or before we were a thing, we convened all the who's who in our county and at the Chamber of Commerce. The city managers, county mayors, director of schools, and so on. And so we said, hey, if we had a magic wand, and that probably wasn't very theologically accurate, but maybe if we had Moses' staff or something like that. Anyway, if we could fix anything that needed to be fixed, what would that be? And so over the course of 2 meetings, 6 weeks, and again, it was very anecdotal. We didn't know what we were doing back then, but there was 4 areas or 4 pockets of vulnerability those people identified: hunger, addiction, safety, and education. So we came up with a vernacular that
It's just about universal.
It's very universal.
That's just about universal.
And if you look at the marks of a flourishing community, you'll see those things are solved for in some way. So we came up with a vernacular that we want to see everyone fed, everyone free, everyone safe, and everyone ready. We want to see everyone whole in Christ and living the life that God created them to live. So the everyone ready piece, the education piece, we didn't know what we were going to do, but the director of schools, the same lady that was speaking that night at the backpack program, she said, hey, have you ever thought of a school partnership initiative? And I said, well, no, but we're ready, we're willing to do it. And she said, well, let's do it. So if anybody ever tells you that the schools are closed, some may be, but we have found that the schools are much more open than churches are willing and ready to go in.
Yes, especially when churches show up to serve.
To serve, that's exactly right. When we're giving, when our goal is to help, and this is true in every domain, but in education is certainly true, that we want you to be successful. How can we help you be successful in doing what you have been tasked to do? If we go in with that posture, the doors open and opportunities for all kinds of wonderful things, gospel-y things, as well as very just logistically or practical things become an option. So she said, hey, can you start a school partnership? So we did. And it took off. It gained so much momentum so fast.
And then every school wants it.
Every school wants it. And every school.
They've seen it successful over here. Every school wants it.
So there's 31 schools in Wilson County, and we're in 29 of them in in an intentional way, and we have agreements with all of them. We just, again, it's harder to mobilize the people than it is to get the permission. So, and now those are taking to the next level where reading programs are emerging in bigger ways, and our goal, and mentoring programs. Our goal is to get Jesus-loving people in relationship with students and families and educators on a regular basis. We believe when there's relationships are being built, transformation begins to happen. And or we can say organically, that's overused maybe, but God does some good things when you and I spend time together. And the same is true when we spend time with kids and their families and educators and their families.
See, I often tell people that we live in a time where ministry comes before the message. When you first started, it was always the Billy Graham School of Evangelism,
That's right.
where you would begin with the scriptures, the
That's
Bible
right.
says. And now, because of everything that's happened, nobody listens. They're watching to see what you do.
That's right.
And when you show up, then they'll listen.
It's as if you were going to parachute into Uganda as a missionary.
Mm-hmm.
You're not, the first thing you're doing as a missionary in Uganda or Malaysia or anywhere else in the world is not to put up a pulpit and begin to preach.
No.
You're going to say, hey, what do y'all need around
Yeah,
here?
build a hospital, build a school.
We used to do that all the time.
All the time.
And so now we don't live in a post-Christian community. We live in a pre-Christian community.
Right.
Jesus is not here yet for most of our neighbors. And so I think we have to have the posture of a missionary.
Mm-hmm.
Trust is not entitled. We have to earn it. And if we'll do what it takes to earn it, people start to pay attention, and doors and opportunities open up for all kinds of wonderful ministry.
Okay, our audience for this podcast are pastors, local church leaders, and so you got somebody sitting in an office or looking at this on their computer, and they are one person in one church, and some of the counties just that we can throw a rock and hit from here are some of the worst places for meth, or the school system is struggling and that kind of stuff. Right opportunities. Where do I begin if I want to do something?
If you're a pastor and you feel like you're all alone, first of all, you're not. There are people around you that love you and that care about you, and you don't have to do this alone. I know that may be hard, and it's not maybe immediately obvious, but if you'll begin to look, it's sort of, we used to say, if you buy a Volkswagen, you see Volkswagens everywhere.
Right.
If you start to look, there's some other people who care about the things you care about. So if you can look around and say, hey, we may not believe all the same things. In other words, you may not go to my church, and I may not go to yours. We may not all believe the same things, but are there some people who care about the things I care about, and that we could maybe begin a conversation? The other thing I'd say is that if you are just one person, you can do a lot. If you'll think about changing a bit of your philosophy of ministry, or maybe tweaking it a little bit to provide time in your work week even, but it could be outside of your work week, to show up at a school or to show up at a business or show up at a nonprofit and begin to ask questions. I don't think some pastors I don't think we're great at asking questions. We have a lot of information to share.
Right.
Good. And it's good information, right? And we feel like we get paid by the word,
Right.
and so we just have a lot of information to share. I think if we can become great question askers and begin to ask the public school teachers some good questions, begin to ask marketplace leaders some good questions, go to the county mayor and ask a question. We began this way, Mike. We when I was at Green Hill, when I first went there, we didn't have a lot of money, but we wanted to be a part of the community. And this, before I knew anything, this was maybe one of the little seeds that began to germinate. I went to our our city manager, and I said, "Hey, we don't have much money, but what could we do to bless the city?" And it was a couple of conversations, and he said, "Our police department, they need a tourniquet. It's a tool they put on their tool belt.
Right.
Police officers are usually the first at a scene, and there's this special tourniquet that goes on, and we don't have them for our officers. So okay, and let's do that." And so all the officers, and then it went to all the auxiliary officers, and then it went to all the future officers. So it grew to about a $4,000 bill, and we really didn't have that kind of margin in our But we just didn't have, but we did it. And the sergeant came, or one of the captains came to our church one Sunday morning. Gosh, I get emotional about it. He got up on the platform, and you could just feel something turn in our church. At least I could.
Yeah.
Maybe other people may not even remember it, but he got up and he got on the platform sometime early in the service, just to say thank you from the Mount Juliet Police Department. And he told how this thing's going to work, how the tourniquet works, and why it's important to save lives. Well, we believe in saving lives too.
All the time, yeah.
And obviously different context and application, but we care about our neighbors who have car accidents and need the help of our first responders. And we all of a sudden thought we're a part of building the city in the way that we could. And that just opened so many opportunities for our church to be involved in our community. So I would begin by asking questions and saying, where is God working? And how could I, as a pastor, me and maybe my Sunday school class or, discipleship group, we don't have to change the world, but you can make a big difference in your part of the world and begin where you are.
Yeah, that's the old story of the guy throwing starfish back into the sea, right?
That's all right. That's exactly right.
I made a difference to that starfish.
And he appreciates it.
That's right. How do people get in touch with you?
Everyone's
Your
Wilson.
website?
Yeah, everyone'swilson.org. Daryl Crouch. Everyone'swilson.org is my email address. And so you can find us on Instagram and Facebook and all those kind of places. And so we'd love to connect and help you do what you do. We're actually incorporated the Everyone's Welcome Network, so we have a vision of helping other communities throughout our state
Get the same kind of thing established.
to do. And we've done a lot of the hard work. We've paid some of the tax for you. So we'd be happy to help you start your own. All right.
We live in a time where the ministry comes before the message, and being able to serve your community and empower your local leaders to make a better place for everyone to live in is so critical for a thriving church. And Daryl and his team and everyone in Wilson have already done that. And you and I can learn a lot from them. So I hope you'll take advantage of following up with Daryl and his team. We are really glad that you have joined us for this podcast and hope you are encouraged, and we'll see you next time.